Agatha, a first-year college student, taking up journalism, stands firm on the ground together with her fellow classmates, fighting for freedom of speech. With red flags and tainted heart, all raised their banners, screaming their agony. 21st century is her time. It seems like yesterday it was still all in the past, and today felt like a dream. Drastic changes indeed inevitable, like how light travel fast to earth. Agatha felt her blood rushing to her veins. She is angry, felt cheated by her own country. Suddenly, she felt cold and dizzy. Her pace became slow. She can hear her heartbeat beating erratically, like she was running on a marathon. A deafening sound filled her ears and everything started to become blurred. Before she closed her eyes, she knows that something is bound to happen. She woke up in the body of an indigenous man. Little did she know that her soul traveled to the longest period in the history of the Philippine literature. A long time before the Spaniards and other foreigners landed on the Philippine shores, our forefathers had their own literature that supports our race. According to Lpw, the oral literature of the pre-colonial Filipinos bore the marks of the community. The subject was invariably the common experience of the people constituting the village food gathering, creature and objects of nature, work in the home, field, forest or sea, caring for children, etc. This is evident in the most common forms of oral literature like the riddle, the proverbs, and the song, which always seem to assume that the audience is familiar with the situations, activities, and objects mentioned in the course of expressing a thought or emotion. Folktales that is made up of stories about life, adventure, love, and horror arise. After pre-colonialization, the Spaniards arrived in Philippines. Agatha woke up in another body, an ilustrado. During this colonization, the Spaniards, especially the priests, introduced the Catholic religion and forced the Filipinos to embrace their beliefs and cultures. The Spanish influence in Philippine literature are very drastic. Teaching of Christiana doctrina became the basis of religious practices. Like for example, novena and rosary. Our Filipino language was influenced by some of the Spanish language, and our periodicals this time also bring religious tones. European legends and tradition assimilated in our songs and corridors. Printing presses that published literary works were dominated by religious orders. Thus, religious theme is in literature that time. The very first book that was published is the Doctrina Christiana, which contained doctrines along with Nuestra Señora del Rosario, which contains the saint and novenas. Libro de los Cuatro, the first written book in typography. Ang Barlaan at Josepat, a biblical story. The Passion, a book about the life of Jesus Christ, and ang mga dalit kay Maria, a song about Virgin Mary. The Spaniards also brought recreational plays, such as the Senerakulo, Panunuluyan, Tibag, and etc. Along with these plays are the folk songs Lehon Lehon Sinta, Pamulinawen, and many more. Agatha once slowly opened her eyes, finding herself in another era. The sons of Ilustrados were soon able to study abroad and gain knowledge on ideas, concepts of freedom, equality, and democracy. In return, these educated Ilustrados looked back at their beloved country and saw the deplorable condition and decided to sought for change. The nationalistic period is a turning point in her Philippine literary journey. This era marked the beginning of the awakening of our sense of nationalism. Multiple literary works attacking the friars who were considered responsible for the oppression of the Filipinos rose up and stirred the masses' yearning for freedom and truth. Two of the most notable pieces are No Limitangere and El Filibusterismo. These literary works contained mostly accusations against the government and the church, and was even used to unite the people. Several newspapers such as La Solidaridad, Diaryong Tagalog, Heraldo de la Revolucion, La Independencia, La República Filipina, and La Libertad during the nationalistic era was all published to spread the longing for freedom of the Filipinos. However, the government became deaf of the people's wishes and the oppression continued with the Spaniards, being more harsher, prompting the people to revolt against the ruler through the katipunan established by Andres Bonifacio. Aside from Supremo, several people also fought during the active revolution, including Apolinario Mabini, Emilio Jacinto, and others. Agatha woke up due to the light surrounding her. American period was said to be one of the turning points which made our Philippine literary tradition colorful and interesting. This period saw the addition of a colorful language, the English language, as an indispensable tool for literature and communication. As the Filipino revolutionaries won against the Spaniards, the Philippine independence was proclaimed on June 12, 1898. The spirit of nationalism of the Filipinos remained undaunted. And with this, peace movements started as early as 1900s, and many Filipinos started writing again after the sword was broken. Also, Filipino men of letters wrote of all forms of literary genres like news, poetry, stories, plays, essays, novels, which clearly depicted their love of country and longing for independence. There were also newspapers published during the American period, and these were primarily established to continue the fight for freedom after the defeat of the Filipino forces against the Americans. These are the El Nuevo Dia, which was established by Sergio Osmeña in 1900s, El Grito del Pueblo, being established by Pascual Poblete in 1900s, and El Renacimiento, founded by Nathaniel Palma. Play stages were also nourished during this period. With the arrival of the English language, a new way of writing literature has emerged. The Filipinos, being lovers of languages and natural linguists, began using this new medium to record their thoughts, sentiments, ideas, and views, dreams and fears, as well as everyday life matters. In short, a new weapon was added to their arsenal. The Philippine literature in English developed and improved from its early years during the American period and beyond. As she opened her eyes, the stride and growth of the Philippine literature in English language and the development of Philippine literature in general was interrupted during the Japanese period. Philippine literature in English came in halt as the Japanese censored all publication except Tribune and Philippine Review. During this time, there was no freedom of speech and so as freedom of the press. The only contact to the outside world was done with utmost secrecy through the underground program called Voice of Freedom. Victoria Abelardo has described Filipino writing in this age of literature as pessimistic and bitter. In prose literature, the weekly Liwayway magazine was put into strict surveillance and was managed by a Japanese named Ishiwara. The Japanese language Nippongo was introduced but not well embraced by the Filipinos despite it is being forcefully taught by the Japanese. Tagalog was favored by the Japanese authority and writing in English was consigned as limbo. Japanese were able to encourage the Filipino in developing vernacular literature. Tanka and haiku were introduced to the Philippines. Haiku is a poem of free verse of Japanese origin. It has 17 syllables divided into 3 lines. The first has 5 syllables, the second has 7, and the third has 5 syllables. Haiku normally features allegorical meaning and usually short but covers a wide scope. The favorite topics of haiku writers include nature, love, patriotism, nationalism, friendship, and the human emotions. On the other hand, tanka poems very similar to haiku, but have more syllables and uses simile, metaphor, and personification. The 31 syllables are divided into 5 lines, with first line with 5, second line with 7, third line with 5, fourth line with 7, and the fifth line with 7. Tank poems are written about nature, seasons, love, sadness, and other strong emotions. Martial Law, 1986. The year where the freedom of the press had been removed, where control reigns on publishing and releasing, especially if the works were specifically about the government. This affects the freedom of expression of the different Filipino writers during this period. Symbolism and allegories were used by the writers during this controlled regime. Theater was used as a medium for sending different protests. The 80s passed on and the writers continued to show dynamism and innovation. Different languages were used in writing literary works with the appearance of new publication. Writers use adjectives and onomatopoeia in writing literary works. Poets make poem meaningfully with themes or topics about life. One well-known poet critic is Lilia Quindosa Santiago, who wrote her award-winning poem entitled Sa Ngalan ng Ina, which is the most comprehensive compilation feminist writing in the Philippines. Filipino writers continue to write different literary works which their topics are mostly social and contemporary issues. They became more conscious to their work of art, and workshop classes existed more and started to study there here and abroad. Literature are not only available in printed media, also digitally. They can be used via internet. Various literary awards were created which encouraged some writers to make more and creative works that will awarded hopefully. Most of the literary works who had entered the awards were English language. Literature is imperiled because of the influence and impact of modern technology today. It let us feel more responsible putting it back to this modern days, keeping it continuous and to innovate in a way people would appreciate and understand it more than before.